Okay, thank you all for joining us for a conservation education program hosted by the Nevada Department of Wildlife. We're going to go ahead and get started, and we'll start with some of our fun ground rules for the program. This is a family program, and it is rated PG. Profanity or inappropriate behavior will not be tolerated, whether it be in the chat or the Q&A. And all of those comments in either of those venues needs to be kept on topic. Failing to follow these guidelines could potentially lead to you being removed, not just from the Q&A or the chat, but from the live stream altogether. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. Welcome to the final session of Fish Camp this week, hosted by the Nevada Department of Wildlife. My name is Julie Gabrielson. I am an wildlife education, outdoor education coordinator out of Elko, which is the northeastern part of the state. In the background is Nicole Haddad. I'm pretty sure I destroyed that last name for you, Nicole, I'm sorry. And she's gonna be helping out with the chat and the Q&A as well. So she can answer questions as we go along, or you can save them till the end and we can do a question and answer at the end. If you're not overly familiar with Zoom, we will have a large portion of this with the camera pointed down at my hand so that you can see all that I'm doing with this trout. And I warn you, it's gonna get gooey. It's gonna get a little messy, so hopefully you can tolerate it. If not, fortunately, you can look at the presentation on the side if that's what you'd rather look at. You can adjust the picture size from the presentation to the video of me by using the little bar in between them to make one bigger or the other. You can slide it back and forth. So while I'm getting gloved up, how many of you have ever caught a fish and cleaned it? Go ahead and answer that in the chat for me. So is it Sajwal? Is that right? Sujwal? Have you ever caught a fish yet in your new adventures to fishing? No. Oh, well, this is going to be a great forefront for you so that you kind of know what to do when you get out there. And you can explore them a little bit more once you catch one. Okay, so Nicole, if you'll go ahead and advance to the next screen, perfect. This is what we are going to be dissecting today. This is a rainbow trout. It comes from the Gallagher Fish Hatchery out in Ruby Valley. You guys heard some about that earlier in the week during one of the other presentations. And with that, you can see several different types of fins. You can see different features along the body. And the fins on the fish that on the trout that I'm gonna be dissecting today, it's missing a lot of those fins. It's missing a good portion of the top fin, and I'll show you that in a second. It's missing a good portion of the pectoral and the pelvic fin, as well as the anal fin. And the reason why is because it's a breeder fish from the hatchery. So it has grown up in the hatchery with all the concrete runners, and those runners actually wear those fins down. Most people think that the fins are for swimming, but they are mostly for steering and balance. It's actually the tail that does the locomotion part of it, and the muscles in the body as well. So I'm glad that you're excited. This is a fun thing for me to do as well. Who can tell me why a fish is so slimy? Does anybody know why a fish would be slimy? Go ahead and answer in the chat. Protects their coat. Very good. That is one reason. Protects them from different diseases that they might come up against. Because it lives in water, so it needs to be able to swim real smoothly through the water and over rocks and through bushes and any of the vegetation that might be thick down in the water. It helps kind of create that lubricant for them to get down there. There's also another reason. Does anybody have a guess on that third reason? Predators. Because they're super slimy, and the predators, they can't hang on to them as well as if they weren't slimy. So if you listened at all to if you were in on our Ask the Biologist session yesterday, Jeff Peterson commented that trout were his least favorite to deal with because of how slimy they are and how hard they are to hang on to. So you're gonna see a large pink line on that screen, right down the side of that trout. That's called a lateral line. And what that does is it helps with sonar. It's essentially just a big sonar and radar for them. It helps them to determine things coming closer to it, not just as far as predators go, but also as far as food sources. It could be something as simple as a ripple in the water from an insect on top to another fish coming closer to come in to eat it. So I'm going to go ahead and angle my camera down for a bit. Here is our rainbow trout from Gallagher Hatchery. So on this one, you can see it's got the real defined lateral line. And if you're actually touching it, you can feel the definition of that lateral line. And like I said, the fins are not as defined because they've been worn down quite a bit over the years in the hatchery. So we're going to go ahead and start with the gills. So this is the gill plate, and it protects the gills that help them breathe. So the gill is actually used for breathing for the trout like lungs are for us. So if you look in here, you can see that there are several layers of those gills. I'm going to cut the plate off so that you guys can see those a little bit better. I feel like my paper towel is making it more of a hindrance for me today. Okay, so as we're looking at this gill, the gills pick up oxygen from the water and gives off carbon dioxide to the fish, or gives it off. That's what they emit when they breathe it out. So all of those little filaments are what filter that oxygen through the water. Just like the lungs of a mammal, us as humans, or like your larger game species. All of these little pieces in here are called rakers. Those rakers have a very special purpose because the fish, the trout, not only breathes through its mouth, but it also eats through its mouth. So it's really important that it has a way to filter food down into its esophagus so that it eats it instead of filtering them back out through the gills, which essentially would end up clogging the gills up. So those rakers, see if you can see those rakers are what help filter the food from going out the gills and directing them down to the esophagus. All right, so now we're going to get started with the internals. So Nicole, if you'll pull up the next screen, I'm going to open the belly up, and this is essentially what we're going to be pulling out is on that screen right there. We're going to look at the liver, we're going to look at the heart, the kidney, the stomach, the intestines. We're going to look at the vent, which is also known as the anus, and the air bladder. So we're going to look at a lot of different things. The vent is this hole right down here by the bottom, by their anal fin, by that bottom fin. That vent is used for two different purposes. One, it's used for evacuation of feces and any urine that they might build up, but it's also used for reproduction. The females will lay their eggs through the vent, and the males will lay their milk through the vent. So to open it up, I'm going to start with cutting. I'm going to stick my scissors right into the vent and pushing forward and cutting through the muscles or the tissue meat and the skin. Nicole, you can go to full screen now. This is also one of the ways that you can start to clean a fish when you've caught one that you've decided to take home and eat. You can start it by cutting this open and then just ripping everything out from here without actually pulling the pieces apart. I'm going to destroy this fish a little bit more than I would out in the field, just so that it makes it a little bit easier for you to see everything. But a lot of people, they can do fish cleaning two different ways. One is what I'm doing. I will frequently cut off the tail and the head because they've got there's a lot of bones in there and they're not as easy to eat. So by cutting those off, it's just a little bit less that you have to deal with when you're getting ready to cook them. And then just ripping out all of the insides. The other way is to fillet it. And what people do is they'll take a knife and they'll start here, and they'll actually start by going forward under the fin and the gill, and then doing a sharp turn and coming back under the meat all the way down the backbone. And that actually removes a lot of the bones that are in the skin as well, all those rib bones. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut forward so that you can see everything in there as it lays. I'm starting at the vent. I'm going to go in a little ways. Then I'm going to go up from the right behind the gill. And I'm going to cut all the way up. So I'm basically going to create a window for you guys to see. And then I'm going to cut that whole piece out. Again, I normally would not do this if I planned on eating the fish because this trout is extremely yummy. And this is the best part of it, obviously. And I would lose a lot of that. So now you're looking at all different parts of the fish. This is essentially what you just saw in the printout that Nicole showed ahead of time. So we're going to start with the liver. This very large organ right here in the front of the chest cavity is the liver. Now the liver, it helps with digestion and stores nutrients. And attached to the liver is the gallbladder. And I'm going to have to pull it out in order for you to hopefully see the gallbladder. Okay. So here is our liver. This little grayish translucent pocket on the other side of the liver, that's the gallbladder. Now the gallbladder is responsible for storing the bile, which is used in the digestion process. So this is a pretty big liver compared to some of the other ones that I've pulled out lately. Leave that there for you. And this trout must have been a female because I'm seeing remnants of eggs in her. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut the esophagus, which is this real defined pinkish white tube up here at the very front of the neck. We're going to pull that out. And when we cut that, we're actually going to be able to pull out a large portion of the other organs. Oh, there's some smaller eggs in here too. Now there's one more cut when we pull these out like this down here at the bottom by the vent. Actually, that one pulled out pretty easily. So here's what we're looking at. We've got the esophagus that we just cut. What that does is that tube carries all the food from the mouth down into the stomach. Then the stomach receives it, which is right about here. She wasn't fed real recently, so her stomach isn't quite as full. But the stomach, obviously, is where the food passes to the digestive food to the it passes the digested food to the intestine. Now, sometimes you can cut open the stomach to see what they most recently ate, being that this was a hatchery fish. It has digested pellets in it. If you were out in open waters, there's a good chance that there would be different types of insects, which would help you learn a little bit better about what the fish are eating at the time to help you fish better and catch more. It's just a matter of what's more appealing to them at the time. And it could be insects, it could be different types of vegetation and like plankton down in the bottom of the lake and stuff like that. So that's the stomach. And then you've got the intestine, which is what takes care of all of the evacuation. And that's the part that attaches to the vent. But then we've also got some eggs that have started growing here. So this one had she gotten to live, she eventually would have pushed out more eggs for more reproduction. A typical trout will lay around 2,000 to 4,000 eggs. So depending on the size and the food and the resources will depend on just how many eggs they put out. So are you guys able to see those eggs well enough? They're very tiny eggs. Then we have the air bladder, and I love it when I'm able to pull the air bladder out completely. So the air bladder is responsible for flotation. So they've got fins and tails for balance and locomotion, but what helps them go higher or lower in the water? And that's the air bladder. So they can inflate it to go higher in the water, and they can deflate it to go lower in the water and sink. So they might do that for a couple of different reasons. One being for food and resources. The other is water temperature. So trout are pretty sensitive when it comes to the temperature that they prefer to live in. And with that, they like to be in colder water. So as it warms up in the summer, they typically will find that colder water a little bit lower in the lake, sometimes really low in the lake. The other one that we're looking at here is this dark red spot. It actually looks kind of like the kidney. It's on the opposite end of the organs though. So that is actually the spleen. It's considered a non-vital organ. It's very similar to a lymph node as far as what it is, but it acts primarily as a blood filter and plays important roles regarding red blood cells and the immune system. I think that's pretty important. So the next is the kidney, this whole black spot down the back. It's actually very dark red. That is the kidney. And the kidney is responsible for filtering out the waste from the blood. So this one, it's funny because we all grow up with different ideals on what is actually the function of something in the animals that we pursue. I was told that this was actually the digestive system. So this was essentially part of the evacuation that they released. So this one, to pull it out, it's kind of jello-y. So sometimes you can get it pretty complete. Other times it's just a bunch of little chunks that you get. But when you're cleaning a fish, getting ready to eat it, you definitely want to get all of this out. And most of the time, by running your finger along the back like this, you can do so. So this one we were able to pull out fairly complete. And there's your kidney. Now we have two organs left that we're going to go for. One is the heart. And the heart is very well protected because the heart's kind of, I mean, it's a super important part. It's the one that's responsible for pumping all the blood through the body. And it's tucked right up here behind the gill towards the bottom of the chest. And it's going to be extra tucked in there and extra protected by extra tissue. And you can kind of see it. Hopefully you can see me flipping that around right there. It's kind of a triangle pyramid shape. And you can cut it out by cutting that main aorta that it is attached to. Let me grab some paper towel so you can see that easier on my glove that's so dirty. All right, so there is your heart. Now these are pretty small. The brain is frequently a little bit smaller than that even. Okay, now actually we might have time. What time is it? We're about a half hour in now. We might have time to dig into the brain, but the brain can be tough to get to. But for sure, we're going to get started on the eyeball. Now we all know what the eyeball does because we share that function as well. But inside the eyeball is the lens, and that's actually what we're going to go for. But we have to cut the entire eyeball out of the socket to do so. So there's our eyeball. And then we're going to cut into it. And once you pop it open, it's very liquidy. I've had many students squirt themselves while doing this. And you're going to kind of feel around in there as you're pushing around. And you'll feel something round and small. Sometimes they're smaller than others. But it will look like a little clear ball. Like I said, sometimes it's harder than others to find. I get it. Oh, I feel it. It's running from me. I might need to make another cut. All right. So this one, we might have to go into the other eye because this one looks like it might have had a damaged lens. Oh. Yeah, we'll cut into the other eye and see if we can find a better lens. This one, I did find a little ball, but my guess is it was damaged. Fortunately, we have two to work with. Do we have any questions while I'm trying to find this lens? Starting to think this fish was blind. I did just find it. I'm just going to clean my hand off again for you. Okay. So if that gives you any idea of the size of the lens. So what that lens does is it allows them to see more of a peripheral vision. Trout, because they are considered a prey animal, even though they're also predators, they need to see further around behind them. So it allows almost 360 degrees of vision behind them, like a lot of our prey animals are, like elk and deer, antelope, bighorn sheep, all of them will have that same type of lens for that ability. So this lens allows that to happen. If you ever play with the eyeball lens, it does pop and it squirts even further than anything else. So, so it gets going. So I just forewarn you on that. Now the brain is going to be right in this top part, in between the eyes, just before the end. It's pretty gooey, and it actually looks very much like a normal brain, just very small.
Julie, while you're doing that, we do have one question. How do fish lay their eggs?
So fish will lay their eggs the same way that they evacuate any feces from their bodies, through that bottom vent. It's just that hole in the bottom of their belly towards their back end that allows them to do that. And what they'll do is the females will go and dig a red, is what it's called. And that is just a big basin in a nice sheltered, shaded area of the stream or water that they're in. And that allows for a little bit more protection of the eggs. Then the male will come over and he will fertilize the eggs. And he'll fertilize the eggs the same way that the female laid them. And then after that, the eggs are kind of on their own. And I'll show you some eggs here in a second. After I get into the brain, I've got a cool little display that I can show you. Hopefully it will show up well enough on the camera. Do we have any other questions while we're still doing this? Remember, you can use your chat or the Q&A for questions.
There's one more. Do trout have teeth, and how do they eat their food?
Trout do have teeth. And actually, let's see if I don't know if you can, how well you can see them. Try to get a good visual. So they have they're short and very sharp teeth. So as you can see, even my glove, if I put my hand in its mouth, it'll pull on my gloves, and they're pretty sharp. And so what they'll do is they'll use those teeth to actually grab onto their prey, and then they'll swallow it. The brain's fighting me today, just like the lenses. She might have been frozen too long.
We have a couple more questions, Julie.
Okay.
About the eyes, the question is, how do they see behind them? So
that round lens allows them, the way that it's built, it's just by nature, it allows them a bigger vision. So in addition to the eyes being on the side of their head instead of on the front of their head, that is what brings it around to where they have more vision like that. Whereas your predator animals, to include humans, they have eyes on the front of their head. So they're not able to see as far around them as prey animals are with the eyes on the side.
And second, did this fish lay eggs before it died?
This fish actually laid many eggs. It was a breeder fish at the hatchery. So what that means is they will spawn it several times of the year and make new egg or make new fish with it. In a controlled environment, that allows them the survivability is much better in that kind of an environment. Okay. So
this is a good question. Why is it so hard to get to the brain?
It is a good question. And I might have, so the brain is heavily protected, just like the heart is. It is tucked way under a bunch of cartilage and even some bone. And it's just cutting through all of that without actually hitting the brain that is a challenge. So here is the brain, and it actually did turn a little bit to mush. I can't say that I didn't hit it with the scissors getting into it, but it also might have been, again, from freezing it and being in the that frozen state so long, because a lot of those organs will kind of mush up a little bit by being frozen too long. So this brain, that's about the size of it. Normally it's got, more defined components and little sections to it, like a human brain would, just on a much smaller scale. So there's the brain. So as for the eggs, once the eggs are laid, let me take these off so that you can see my little display, hopefully, without it getting too gross. Once the eggs are laid, this is is that pretty clear right there, Nicole?
Yeah, it's a little hard to see, but the egg parts on the far side, we can see all right.
Okay, so
over there,
this one is what it looks like when they've been laid and fertilized, right? I mean, like day one. Then this next one, see if we can get it a little bit closer for you. That next one, that's at about 15 days, and those are called eyed eggs. So all those black dots in those eggs, that's actually their eyes. And they are in a very translucent, clear shell. So when they hatch at about 30 days, they actually remove themselves from that shell, just like a chicken would or another type of bird. The shells can actually kind of be hard to find because they're not as defined as some of your solid colored shells. So then we've got the fry, the sac fry, or alevin, and they have a belly on them that feeds them for about another 15 days, sometimes a little bit longer, sometimes a little bit short. And what that does is that sac is attached to their belly, and it's all of the nutrients they need. They don't need to be fed. They don't need to go find food. It has everything they need to help them get more development. The next one is at about day 45. And those are your fries, borderline fingerlings. And at this point, this is when they're going to start going out and finding small food sources like zooplankton. And as they grow, their food grows. Hopefully you can see all that real well.
One follow-up question for you is about how big can the eggs be?
The eggs will be, I wish I had an idea for you. So this is a pretty standard size for an egg. Hold on. Let me take the other glove off. So to kind of give you an idea with my fingernail next to it, that's about the size. That's pretty typical. Some eggs will be a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller depending on the genetics of the trout. But in general, that's pretty standard. All right, do we have any other questions?
We missed one, and the question was, why is the heart so small?
So if you think about it, the heart is, it develops for the size of the animal or the fish or whatever the heart is in. So if you look at the heart of a human, a typical heart of a human is about the size of the fist of that particular human. So if you put that small heart in comparison to the size of the trout that I just opened up, that's pretty comparable. And that's just, as the trout grows, the heart will grow. As you know, so when the trout was really small, it obviously is considerably smaller. Any other questions?
There's one more, and it says, how big is the biggest egg at the hatchery? So I guess maybe maybe he's referring if there's other fish at this hatchery, or are they all trout at the hatchery?
So they do raise other types of trout at the Gallagher Fish Hatchery. They also raise brown trout as well as some tiger trout. They do have those out at Gallagher and Ruby Valley. I can't speak for some of the other hatcheries because I haven't spent much time at them. I do spend some time at the one out in Ruby Valley. So the biggest size egg, that is a fantastic question. I can't say that I know the answer to that. Usually what they do when they're weighing eggs, they will put them on a measuring stick, and they'll have a specified line on that measuring stick, and they'll count that one measuring stick in between those two lines, and that will help them determine what those size of eggs are from that particular batch. And they, like I said, they might be a little bit bigger than that one that I showed you in that display. They might be a little bit smaller. How many eggs can fish? Yep, fish will lay 2,000 to 4,000 eggs. Once they become spawning adults, which is 2 to 3 years old, depending on the trout, sometimes 4 years old, depending on the genetics for it, they'll lay anywhere between 2,000 and 4,000. And in the trout life cycle, out of 2,000 eggs, we only need 2 to make it to the spawning adult stage in order for the trout life cycle to continue on.
How long can a trout live?
They can live, a little bit longer than you'd expect. We've got some trout that will live up to 30 years, like your big lake trout, they'll get bigger. Rainbow trout is on average 7 years, right around there. Some do go a little bit longer than that. There's other types of trout that won't make it more than 2 or 3 years. Brown trout will also live a very long time.
All right, I think we caught up with questions that were already asked. If you guys have any more, go ahead and submit them real quick for Julie.
Yeah, and while we're waiting, don't forget to fill out your survey at the end. That helps us a ton with all of our online programming and what we can do better for you and what we can change or increase. We really enjoy doing this for you guys. And thank you, Nicole. All right, well, if we don't have any more questions, we're going to go ahead and sign off. And thank you again for joining us during Fish Week or Fish Camp this week. This is wrapping it up. This is the last session of the week, and we thank you once again for joining us. Have a great weekend ahead. It is a holiday weekend for us, so be safe, be smart, and have a ton of fun doing it out there. And don't forget to embrace the outdoors with all of it. Responsible recreation is what it's all about, and we encourage you to check out more about that. Can you get to the heart without cutting it? Another question that just came in. You can leave it in there and you can just see it once you cut the fish open, and you can just leave the heart in there. As a matter of fact, a lot of people, when they're cleaning a fish after catching it to take it home and eat it, most people don't even get to that part in cleaning. They just cut the head off, and that's what's included in when they cut it off. But you do have to open the fish up in order to see it. Unfortunately, no, there's not another way to get to the brain. I would certainly try it. All right, thank you guys again. I think that's wrapping it up. Again, you can always contact any of us with questions. We're happy to help one way or another. Our emails are readily available for you on our website, as well as through the Zoom registrations where you signed up for all of these. Again, have a great weekend, and we're going to sign off for now. Take care, guys.